Good morning, everybody. We were talking about American short stories. Now, with the dawn of 20th century, England witnessed certain storytellers who were innovating in their style, and their content was also different from the stories written earlier. Some of these writers who ruled this period in history of short stories in England are D.H. Lawrence, Catherine Mansfield, James Joyce, and A.E. Cuppard. In America, during this time, if there was only one short story teller, aside from Henry James and Hamlin Garland and Edith Wharton, he was Sherwood Anderson. And many short story writers tried to copy or follow his style. Now, Anderson deviated from both the popular and mechanical art of Hart and O. Henry, and also from the serious writing of Bierce and Crane. He just developed his own style, and in a way, he was responsible for bringing about a change, we can call it Renaissance, in the American history of short story. His prose style deviated from everyday speech, influenced American short story writing between World Wars First and Second. In the second quarter of 20th century, two voices rose in the realm of short story, which the most acknowledged and appreciated. These writers were Ernest Miller Hemingway and William Cuthbert Faulkner. Now, they were not the writers following the same line of writing short stories, but they brought about a change in the art of story writing. Both of them deviated from the traditional ways of short story writing of both England and America. Hemingway, he just learned from Anderson, but still he went ahead of him in keeping his stories close to life. And he did not consider it to be an art, but he tried to touch the hearts of his readers by portraying reality. He was very unconventional in his writings. He traded language very violently and pruned it. And his writing was full of understatements. And he used ironic and symbolic implications to convey his ideas or meanings. Faulkner also did the same, used the language in an unconventional, untraditional way. He too pruned it, and he tried to make it more beautiful and structured so that it can give the highest degree of satisfaction to his readers. So today, we are going to talk about the story writing of Hemingway and William Faulkner, in what ways they were similar and in what ways they were different. Just now I have told you that both of them tried to deviate from the conventional way of storytelling. But as far as the themes and concerns are related, or the modes of writing, the narrative structure, the narrative techniques used by them, the autobiographical elements, and the background that they have chosen, they are not the same. First we'll see, or we will try to talk about Hemingway, how he considered his stories to be the carriers or the means of just communicating what he thought about life, what he thought about people, and what were the conditions that were prevalent when he was writing stories. And we should not forget that both these writers wrote at the time when world wars were going on. So they knew well the effect or the impact of the circumstances or the situations on the minds and hearts of the people. Now, if we talk about Hemingway, we see that in his writing there is certain tragic tone. He examined the potential of human life and concerned himself with the question what humans can be and what they can do. Whereas Faulkner has different emotional dimensions in his stories. He describes things romantically with a realistic perspective. He also tries to capture the intricacies and complexities of human relationship during different levels of conflicts. The way these two story writers influenced and enriched American short story was unique, and it was never done before, and it had never been done since. Now, Hemingway considered life to be full of conflicts, full of struggle. But at the same time, he tried to describe in his stories, we can describe his stories in a very short phrase, the violence at the heart of men and things. He is not only concerned with the physical violence, but the psychic violence, not only the violence of war, but also the violence of everyday life. A human being undergoes different kinds of stresses, anxieties, and what are the effects of these anxieties that make a man suffer, and at the same time, what are the various outlets or you can say the common phrase today is stress buster. So, in his stories, we find reality depicted in such a way that we come to know of many ways to grapple with this kind of reality. Hemingway does not look at the confrontations and threats of violence, but also concerns himself with the consequence of this threat. His concern with violence is so intense that one can sense it in his choice of characters, situations, sense of life, and world. In his stories, in dealing with violence, very often he evokes the emotions of fear, pain, hurt, anxiety, tension, trauma, and so on. Now, many critics have attacked him on the basis of this obsession, or we can say preoccupation with violence. Now, to speak of violence in Hemingway's work is to broaden the spectrum of his themes and concerns. Now, the particular themes in his stories, they just try to bring to us different points. And these points are shock of experience, violence of war. Now, by shock of experience, he means to say that many times in life we come across certain events or incidents which we never thought about or which were quite unexpected. Then we can say the second one is violence of war. And I've already told you what he meant by violence of war. The effect of the circumstances or the conditions prevailing during wartime on the minds and hearts of people. So, it affects the psychology, how they are under constant fear, or you can say insecurity. Then we have another point that comes to our attention when we read the stories of Hemingway. It is man and woman relationship. Now, of course, life, the kind of family life depends to a great extent on the relationship between man and woman, if they happen to be the members of the same family. Even if they are not members of the family, then of course you come across many members of the opposite sex. So what is the reaction or what happens? Then quintessential nothingness. Quintessential nothingness. What do you mean by quintessential nothingness? It means that sometimes the characters are made to go in a state of depression. You know, what for is this struggle? What do we get? Now, sometimes we do realize that what are we fighting for? What are we struggling for? What do we gain out of all this? So sometimes we just conclude that it was for nothing, that way. Now, then the last point, and this is important, and this he wanted to focus on, celebration of values. Now, when he talks about violence of war, he wants to emphasize upon the need of values. Love, sympathy, now kindness, all these values are required for a healthy society. And for this, our saints and all the great men of all ages, they have been trying to teach human beings. Now, he has contributed, Hemingway we can say he has contributed in his own way. When he talks about violence, indirectly, he just calls for the need of non-violence and peace. In his story, Old Man at the Bridge, we find the old man just trying to worry about the pet or the pets that have been left behind. He's not in a condition to walk properly. He's tired. But even then, he's worried about the pets. So if we are worried about the pets, the animals, the birds, everyone, shouldn't we be worried about our fellow human beings? So that is important. In a very indirect way, he has tried to bring home to us the importance, the significance of values. That is an important point when we talk about the themes and the concerns presented or presented by or present in the stories of Hemingway. War stories, of course, they might seem to be different because they are concerned with war, but even then the message is clear that is war, there's a question, is war the only remedy? Is war essential? Can't we do without fighting, without quarreling? Now, they just, this point, man and woman relationship, they often come up at the surface, but beneath this calm surface, one sees high tension and restlessness lurking. So we find that superficially they might be different meaning, but underneath there is hidden meaning, hidden message. Now, in his stories, he explores the theme of nothingness. Some of his stories, like Soldier's Home in Another Country, A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, these stories we find this theme of nothingness explored. Now, the story, the Undefeated, The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber, we find the protagonists fighting for their values and ideas. Now, according to R.R. Weeks, Hemingway have themes which create a limited range of character placed in quite similar circumstance and measured against unvarying code. When we talk about the style of writing, we can say it is a pure objective writing. Now, pure objective writing, what do we mean by it? Hemingway was of the opinion that a writer should not be dogmatic. He should not try to tell his readers that this is the right path or the right line. He just depicts reality as it is, without trying to prove his favor for any stand. He just does not tell us that what should be. He just wants to tell us what is. So, we can say that he stayed away from emotional exaggeration, the trap of, and also from the trap of falling into emotional depression. His treatment of emotion is clean and functional. And he focused on capturing details objectively, facts, images, events, and actions, which made the audience feel an inward emotion. Now, the consequence of reading Hemingway will tell what do you really felt rather than what you were supposed to feel or had been taught to feel. So, we find that there is no preconceived design. What really happened in action, the real thing, the sequence of motion, and the fact which made the emotion. Now, about this style, I think, Eliot perhaps must have said objective correlative a decade earlier. Now, Hemingway never acknowledged the possibility of owing his style to Eliot. Now, in Hemingway, we find many autobiographical elements. He was, no doubt, an autobiographical writer. In his writing, we find the presence of a thing which he was deeply interested in his real life, like bullfighting, deep-sea fishing, big game hunting, and war. And his famous novels, A Farewell to Arms. I mean, people say that he was because he was a soldier of army, he was involved in that action. He could just write about war in an authoritative way. Now, the art of Hemingway lies in the use of symbolism and irony. And all American literature, we find that there is use of symbolism and irony. But we find different kinds of symbols used for different purposes, and even the same symbols used for different purposes. In many stories of Hemingway, we find this. Now, symbolism, he makes use both symbolism and irony. He uses them in his narratives for the purpose of implication and indirection. He tries to explore through symbolism and irony. He tries to explore the complexity of life of people in his time in an imaginative way. Now, all human perception can be reduced to the perception of likeness and perception of difference. And symbolism just represents the perception of likeness, and irony represents the perception of difference. Symbolism, it just tries to show harmony and irony through discord. So, symbolism consolidates and irony complicates. You can say symbolism does the work of synthesizing and irony that of analyzing. Now, let us talk about Faulkner. Faulkner was not appreciated in the beginning, but by the year 1946, people did begin to admire him as a short story writer. Now, Hemingway just tried to begin with America, but later on he just made his characters move on to other countries. Whereas Faulkner, he tried to focus his attention only on America, and especially the southern America, the southern part to which he belonged. And he tried to focus his attention on family, on community, and especially the life of the blacks or the Negroes. And he has tried to create a Yoknapatawah County, and this is an imaginary district, of course, created fictional place, but just as R.K. Narayan has created Malgudi, in the same way, Faulkner talks about this, but what we try to read in Faulkner's story is about the kind of life spent by the Southerners in the southern part of America. Now, his themes, Faulkner's themes, when we talk about his themes, we find that he writes about the search for meaning, racism, connection between past and present, with social and moral burdens. Now, he was born and raised in Mississippi, so the stories of the South were ingrained into him, and he used his material in his greatest novels, and he was writing about the decayed fragments of myth with the Civil War, slavery, and so many other events hanging in the background. Now, the Old South, the New South, the reconstructed South, if it has to do with the South, Faulkner wrote about it. Now, we always find his themes within the context of Southern America. Now, the South is a place where community and social structure influence a person's life heavily. We can see it miles away in barn burning. The family ties, the social classes, the workings of the system, we experience it all in this story of Faulkner, barn burning. Faulkner's work was really sociologically groundbreaking literature in a way. Now, Faulkner was not a racist person, which doesn't surprise us now, but was quite a shock to the structure of the South in his time. He dealt with the issue of racism. Now, the language used by Faulkner was the language spoken by the people of the South. Now, he showed, just as Hemingway showed an obsession with violence of war, he showed an obsession with murder, rape, incest, suicide, greed, and general depravity that did not exist anywhere except in the mind of the author. Now, this Critics of Faulkner have criticized him more for his modes of writing than for his themes and content. They find his use of narrative technique and structure, along with his use of language, as a hindrance in understanding the meanings of his work. Now, it is very characteristic of Faulkner's writing, which is admired by his supporters. Now, Faulkner's style in short stories is not the typical Faulknerian stream of consciousness narration found in his major novels. Now, one of the most effective ways Faulkner establishes depth of character and scene is by using long list of description. He uses long descriptions, and that is very significant about his style. Now, the extended descriptions can be noted in many stories. For example, That Evening Sun and many others. Now, Faulkner's use of language is a bit complex and ambiguous. Now, the meaning of his prose is very difficult to understand. So, these are some of the characteristics that we find in the stories of Faulkner and Hemingway. But no doubt, both of them are great short story writers of America. And if we have to understand the short stories of America, we have to read the stories written by these two great writers who were close contemporaries, though their style was different, but still the effect and the impact they made was really great. Thank you.